to another edition of Thunderdome, the first edition that includes my new ring light. Welcome to Chapter 9, the only chapter in Unit 6. So, lifespan development. Just a little precursor to this. Usually this is the second college psych class that you would end up taking. The first one would be Psych 101, but that's what you're in right now. And the second one would be, human lifespan development, child development, maybe something like that. So, this one chapter is actually expanded into an entire course in college. So pay attention, and hopefully this is the first psych class that you get to take in college because you'll pass that AP exam. All right, so developmental psychology, pretty easy, branch of psychology that studies how people change over the lifespan. So we're talking about physically, mentally, socially, throughout the entire life. Developmental psychologists investigate the influence of biological, environmental, social, cultural, behavioral factors on development at every age and stage of life. So they look at every single aspect. I mean, imagine having a bunch of perspectives, right, and then compiling it into one certain study, which would be lifespan development. Some aspects of development, such as prenatal development and language development, are closely tied to critical periods. Critical periods is a term that you probably need to know, and those are just exactly what you think they are. Critical, okay? They mean a lot. When you're in them, things could go one way or the other, okay? So, critical period. Periods during which a child is maximally sensitive to environmental influences. Most of our physical, mental, and social changes occur gradually, so it's not necessarily the step thing that you'll see. It's not going to go stage by stage by stage, and once you hit this age, boom, you're there. It's more or less like a nice gradual incline of what we would experience as lifespan development. Another important theme in developmental psychology is the interaction between heredity and environment. Now, if you've been with me all year long, you know that is a major thing in psychology. Heredity versus environment, which one means more? And the answer tends to be both. Both of them mean so much, okay? So if you look here, and it might be tough to see on your screen, it says major stages of lifespan. It goes prenatal, infancy and toddlerhood, early childhood, middle childhood, which would be 6 to 12 years old, adolescence, which is what some of you would be in right now, 12 to 18 years old, young adulthood, which what I am in right now, 18 to 40, middle adulthood, 40 to 65, and late adulthood, 65 years to death. So, moving forward. Genetic contributions to your life story. So let's talk about this a little bit. I feel like a biology teacher a lot of the times whenever I get to this point. But zygote, single cell formed at conception from the union of the egg cell and sperm cell. This is what we all start out. This is how we all start out, every single one of us. Okay? Again, whenever you look at Maslow's bottom ring of hierarchy of needs, sex is included in that, right? The bottom ring is like the bottom stage of the hierarchy of needs is pretty simple to understand. You need it to live, right? Air, water, food, sleep, excretion, and sex. That's not necessarily saying that you have to have sex. It means that sex had to have happened for you to exist, for the species to continue. So, chromosome, long thread-like structure composed of twisted parallel strands of DNA that's found in the cell's nucleus. Again, hopefully you learned this in biology. It's what the genetic data inherited from your parents is contained in. So what is DNA? It's a double-stranded molecule that encodes genetic instructions, the chemical basis of heredity. It comes in a double helix. So stores the inherited information that guides the development of all living organisms. Now, contained within DNA is a gene. So a unit of DNA on a chromosome that encodes instructions for making a particular protein molecule, the basic unit of heredity. That would be a gene. Genes direct the manufacture of proteins. Proteins are used in virtually all of your body's functions, from building cells to manufacturing hormones to regulating brain activity. Your body requires hundreds of thousands of different proteins to function. Each protein is formed by a specific combination of amino acids, and that combination is encoded into a particular gene. So let's go a little bit further into genes. So this is kind of just looking at what we're dealing with here in this particular part of the chapter. So packed in the nucleus of the cell are 23 pairs of chromosomes, represent your unique genotype, which is just your genetic makeup. A gene is a segment of the DNA, contains genetic instructions for making a particular protein. And genes are arranged in pairs. Hopefully you've learned that already as well. And each gene is a segment of DNA. So, genotype, all right? Unique genetic makeup of an individual organism. So at fertilization, your biological mother's egg cell and your biological father's sperm cell contribute 23 chromosomes. This set of 23 chromosome pairs represents your unique genotype or genetic makeup. Don't get this confused with physical appearance. Understand that this is genetic makeup. Some of these genes can lay dormant inside of you and never be turned on by the environment, but they're there. So with the exception of reproductive cells, sperm or eggs, every cell in your body contains a complete identical copy of your genotype. Human genome, this is something that was really popular whenever I was in high school, right around 2000, 2002. It's the complete set of DNA in the human organism. So it was called the Human Genome Project. It was getting completed. It is complete, pretty much now, but back then they were mapping the human genome. One surprising discovery was that the complete human genome contains only about 20,000 to 25,000 protein-coding genes. Far fewer than previous estimates, which they thought was going to possibly be 100,000 genes. All humans have the same basic set of genes, but we have alleles. So alleles, genes that come in different versions. So let's talk about that a little bit right here. So as a general rule, your genotype contains 2 copies of each gene, one inherited from each biological parent. These genes may be identical or different. The range of potential alleles varies for individual genes. Some genes have just a few different versions, while other genes have 50 or more possible alleles. So it is this unique combination of alleles that help make up your genotype and you unique. So the best known, although not the most common pattern of allele variation, is the simple dominant recessive gene pair. For example, the development of freckles appears to be controlled by a single gene, which can either be dominant or recessive. If you inherit a dominant version of the freckles gene from either or both of your biological parents, you have the potential to display freckles. But to be freckle-free, you would have to inherit 2 recessive no freckle genes, one from each biological parent. It's just an example of alleles. Here we talk about sex chromosomes. So this is the 23rd pair of chromosomes in humans. It's designated as an X or a Y. Biological sex is determined by the 23rd pair of chromosome. The sex chromosome, while every egg has 1 X chromosome, every sperm cell has either 1 X or 1 Y chromosome. Whether a zygote develops into a male or female depends on whether the egg is fertilized by a sperm with a Y chromosome, XY resulting in a male, or by a sperm cell with an X chromosome, XX, resulting in a female. Notice that X chromosome, left, is larger and has more genes than the Y chromosome, right. This confers some protection against certain genetic disorders for females. Why? Because by having 2 X chromosomes, females are more likely to have a normal allele than a disease-producing allele. If a male has a disease-producing allele on his X chromosome, then he is less likely to have a normal allele on his smaller Y chromosome to override it. So this is all genetics. This is why males are more likely to display various genetic disorders such as red-green color blindness, hemophilia, which they inherit via the X chromosome contributed by their biological mother. So just a little talk about the 23rd pair of chromosomes, just sex chromosomes in general. So just know that the 23rd pair is that, and know the difference between XY and XX. Phenotype. This is your physical makeup. So don't get it confused with genotype. Genotype is your genetic makeup, which is easy to remember because genotype. And then phenotype is easy to remember because it starts with pH, and that is the same thing that starts with physical appearance. So, phenotype, the observable traits or characteristics of an organism as determined by the interaction of genetics and environmental factors. People with a particular genetic configuration will be more or less sensitive to particular environmental factors. For example, think of people you know who sunburn easily, such as redheads or people with very fair skin. Their genotype is especially sensitive to the effects of ultraviolet light. One person's freckle factor is another person's light tan or searing sunburn. So, again, phenotype right here. It's your genes and your environment together, and the environment would turn on certain genes, and you would look a certain way because of that. Calls attractive girl cuticle in AP Bio, gets told he has a bad phenotype. Bad luck, Brian. Epigenetics, the study of the mechanisms that control gene expression and its effect on behavior and health. Really interesting field, right? You can go farther and farther, and you can get into things like CRISPR and genetic reconstruction and all that kind of stuff. For any given cell, it's the epigenetic settings that determine whether it will become a skin cell, a nerve cell, or a heart muscle cell. Thus, epigenetics investigates how gene activity is regulated within a cell, such as identifying the signals that switch the genes to on and off. Again, you can have a set of genes and they never be turned on by the environment. That's why we know in psychology that heredity and environment go hand in hand, because most of the time it's the environment which turns on the gene. Okay? So it's what you're exposed to that might turn on a certain gene. Prenatal development. So let's talk about what happens before birth. Prenatal stage, the stages of development before birth. So it's divided into 3 parts, the germinal, embryonic, and the fetal periods. So the germinal is the first 2 weeks of prenatal development. It's super early on, and right after conception. Okay, so during this time, the zygote undergoes rapid cell division before becoming implanted on the wall of the mother's uterus. Some of the zygote cells will eventually form the structures that house and protect the developing fetus and will provide nourishment from the mother. By the end of the 2-week germinal period, the single-cell zygote has developed into a cluster of cells called the embryo. So now we move to the embryonic period. So the embryonic period, the second period of prenatal development, extending from the 3rd week through the 8th week. So during this time of rapid growth and intensive cell differentiation, the organs and major systems of the body form. Genes on the sex chromosomes and hormonal influences also trigger the initial development of the sex organs. So in this time, things are actually developing. It's not just cell division and cell growth. It is development of certain systems. Protectively housed in the amniotic sac, the umbilical cord extends from the placenta on the mother's uterine wall to the embryo's abdominal area, delivering nourishment, oxygen, water, while carrying away carbon dioxide and other wastes. Yeah, so this period is, I guess an old wives' tale, or I guess a tradition, is to not tell anybody you're pregnant until after the 8th week, because you get through this embryonic period, and these 2 periods are very unstable, right? Things can happen during this time that could cause a miscarriage or whatever you might think. Maybe the pregnancy just doesn't go through or whatever. It's so early, and things are so, like subject to any change at all. And this is where, again, the old wives' tale basically says, don't tell anybody you're pregnant until after the 8th week. And this might be why, because things become a little bit more concrete after the 8th week. So let's talk about the placenta. The placenta is a disc-shaped vascular organ that prevents the mother's blood from directly mingling with that of the developing embryo. Acting as a filter, It can prevent many harmful substances from reaching the embryo, but not all. So we have these substances that can actually cross, right, and get through this barrier and harm, the fetus. So teratogens, that's what those things are called. Harmful agents or substances that can cause malformations or defects in an embryo or a fetus. Exposure to radiation, toxic chemicals or metals such as mercuries, PCBs, and lead. I mean, a lot of women are told not to eat certain types of fish because of the mercury level in the fish. Viruses and bacteria such as German measles, syphilis, genital herpes, HIV, all that could possibly cross. Drugs taken by the mother, alcohol, cocaine, heroin. Plenty of babies have been born addicted to drugs. We have a unit in New Hanover County Medical Center that is called the NICU unit, and it is basically for any type of baby that is born with some sort of problem like this, and they're taken care of, specifically because it could have been this situation, and maybe the mother was arrested. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to understand that this happens quite often. Prescription painkillers and other prescription and non-prescription drugs can cross this, and then alcohol. So you might have heard of this one before, but fetal alcohol syndrome, excessive drinking in the first trimester, abnormal facial features, poor coordination, learning disabilities, behavior problems, mental retardation could happen. Again, first trimester, fetal alcohol syndrome, massive amounts of drinking pretty much during that time could have problems, could create problems for your future infant. By 3 weeks after conception, a sheet of primitive neural cells is formed, just as you might roll a sheet of paper, make a tube. This sheet of neural cells curls to form the hollow neural tube. The neural tube is lined with stem cells. Stem cells are pretty interesting, again, massive amounts of research done. But undifferentiated cells that can divide and give rise to cells that can develop to any one of the body's different cell types. But this system, this little tube, actually develops into what we would know as the brain and the spinal cord. So eventually give rise to neurons and glial cells. Gradually, the top of the neural tube thickens into 3 bulges that would eventually form the 3 main regions of the brain: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. And then during peak periods of brain development, new neurons are being generated at the rate of 250,000 neurons per minute. That's awesome. And that continues. And these neurons just come online. I mean, over and over and over again, just millions, trillion at the end, and it's just consistently building on this system that has pretty much formed from almost nothing. So we're at the fetal period, happens to be the longest period, the third and longest period of prenatal development, extending from the 9th week until birth. So the main task during this 7 months is for body systems to grow and reach maturity in preparation for life outside of the mother's body. So around the 3rd month of pregnancy, the fetus can move its arms, legs, mouth, head. Fetus becomes capable of reflexive responses, such as fanning its toes if the sole of the foot is stroked, and squinting if its eyelids are touched, both reflexive responses. The 4th month, the mother experiences quickening, so she can feel the fetus moving. This can happen a little bit faster in some people and a little bit slower in others. It actually depends sometimes on whether the placenta is in front or behind the fetus. So if the placenta is in front of the fetus, you might not be able to feel it as much or see it move or anything like that, but if it's behind the fetus, that's whenever you're going to be able to see movement, feel movement a little bit more. 5th month, all the brain cells the person will have at birth are present. The fetus now has distinct sleep-wake cycles and periods of activity, meaning that they dream. I don't know what. I mean, you can imagine it's auditory, you can imagine it might be feel, touch a little bit, warmth. So who knows? 6th month, the fetus brain activity becomes similar to that of a newborn baby. So at 6 months, the brain activity of the baby is pretty much concrete. The final 2 months, the fetus will double in weight, gaining an additional 3 to 4 pounds of body fat. This additional body fat is basically to help it survive outside of the mother's womb. It is a very traumatic experience. Maybe one of the most traumatic experiences that we've ever experienced in our entire lives, and it happens to be the first thing, right? So we pop out of this world that is so cozy and comfy and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff, and we're warm, and all of a sudden, boom, we're out, we're cold. This is disturbing, it's bright, there's noises, everything is different. I am not used to this. And then all of a sudden, you know, what happens is babies, usually infants, drop weight right after birth. Again, it is a very critical period, right? It's a trying time, especially for an infant. It doesn't know how to do anything, really, except breathe, eat, and feel. And that's pretty much all they understand at that moment. So, newborn adjusts to changing temperatures outside the womb. It also contributes to the newborn's chubby appearance. As birth approaches, growth slows, and the fetus's body systems become more active. Development during infancy and childhood. So, although physically helpless, newborn babies are equipped with reflexes and sensory capabilities that enhance their chances for survival. So they have these 3 reflexes that we'll go over. So we have the rooting reflex. So touching a newborn's cheek, the newborn will turn toward the source of the touch and open its mouth because it believes it's going to find food. Okay? Sucking reflex, put your finger in a newborn's lips and it begins to try and suck and retrieve food. That is natural, inborn in every single one of us at the beginning of our lives because guess what? We need food. Bottle, nipple, whatever it might be, have to find food because if we don't survive. Grasping reflex. Put a finger in the newborn's palm and it will grip it so tightly that it can be pulled upright. This is also known as the Moro reflex. So you can put your fingers in a newborn's hands, they'll grip your fingers and you can lift your fingers up and they will also lift with you. As motor areas in the infant's brain develop over the first year of life, the rooting, sucking, and grasping reflexes are replaced by voluntary behaviors, meaning that you decide to control when to suck on the bottle or grab something. The newborn senses, vision, hearing, smell, and touch are keenly attuned to people because as long as they can find people and be around people, it increases their chances of survival. That's ingrained in you to understand that. Robert Vance in 1961 demonstrated that the image of a human face holds the newborn's gaze longer than do other images. Again, one of the most one of the greatest skills of a human is facial recognition, right? So you see somebody's face and you can understand that maybe you've seen them before or whatever. And also you're trained to pick up faces wherever. You know, that's why we see faces and things that aren't quite faces. Vision is the least developed sense at birth. A newborn is extremely nearsighted, right? Meaning that they can only see things close to them. The optimal viewing distance from the newborn is about 6 to 12 inches. It's the perfect distance for a nursing baby to focus easily on their mother's face and make eye contact. So right here,